So good morning, Pooja. It's so good to have you, and I'm really thrilled to bring in someone who has firstly undergone a huge transformation journey from being a global leader of a brand in a large blue chip company who were working in Unilever earlier, to becoming a Reiki master, a therapist, a healer. It is definitely a journey which is worth talking about, and for us to have learnings from your journey. So I'm very thrilled that you agreed for this interview. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Nanya. I'm really excited to be here and to talk to you.
Okay, so first things first, tell us a little bit about your journey of change. And this is especially for the story of me participants and people who follow us. Firstly, how did your change happen? What were you doing? What inspired you? And how did you get to where you are today?
Sure. I think my story of change started long time back. So I got into this alternate wellness space about 20 years ago because of a personal accident. And I was kind of on to a dual track through most of my corporate life. So I was doing Monday to Friday, the typical corporate 9 to 5 or 9 to 9 actually work. And then on the weekends, I would dabble in Reiki, meditation, therapy, etc. So I was kind of, in a way, living a dual life for a very long time. And my interest in alternate therapies was deepening and deepening as I kind of continued doing that. And I think it got to a point, I still have vivid recollection of having a discussion with my manager, and he was kind of talking about, hey, you are now at this level, you do this role, and then you can get my job. And I was sitting there thinking, I was like, do I really want this job? Is that what I see myself doing for the next, say, 6-7 years? And that made me take a step back and say, okay, what do I really want to do with my life? And it wasn't an easy decision because it took me, I would say, about 1 year to 2 years to make that decision. And the decision was a huge question mark on what do I want to do if I quit my corporate career? Because in the corporate career, your definition of success is quite well defined, right? So, you get your promotions, you get the team increases, your scope increases, etc. So it's a very well-defined career path in that sense. And in my case, I had no reason to quit. Like, I love my boss, I love my team, I would love my work. So there was no impetus to say, hey, something's not working, go try something else. It was more about, as I looked at, for the next 10 years, do I want to continue doing this exact thing, what I'm doing? And I was joking with my boss, which says, hey, I actually really don't want your job because all you do is fly around with money. So I want something more meaningful than that. So that kind of started the question in my head. What do I really want to do with my life? And I think then it went very deep into who am I and who do I want to be? So I think going from a question first from what is success and failure, that was the first question I had to struggle with. Because if I quit my job and start something new, what would success mean like? What would failure mean like? That was one question I struggled with. The second question I think I struggled with a lot was with identity. Because growing up from a traditional Indian background, I had fought a lot to be where I was. So did the regular, the engineering, the MBA, and the corporate ladder, fighting, putting in hard effort to be at a point where my family was looking up to me. I was considered a success. My identity was very intricately linked to being a corporate woman, someone who actually has broken traditions from where she's born in to be this successful corporate person. And if I quit this and become, say, a yoga teacher or a Reiki master, what does my identity look like? So for me, the second big thing I was grappling with was the sense of identity, the sense of who would I be if I'm not this corporate person? And the idea of being a wellness coach at that point in time wasn't very exciting, to be honest, to say, okay, I'm giving up this multinational career to just start doing something small from my home. The identity shift wasn't kind of holding me there.
And I think sorry. So it's interesting you bring up this word identity. And you said that it was really difficult for you to, this was the more difficult part to reconcile or, adopt a new identity. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
So for me, I think we all grow up to identify ourselves as someone. And for a lot of us, that someone tends to be our jobs, tends to be what we do. Not who we are, but what we do. I'm a housewife, I'm a corporate person, I'm this, I'm that. And that was true for me too. So for me, my identity, as I said, was very intricately linked to being a corporate person. And for me, I think it was deeper a little bit more than that, because I come from a traditional background where women didn't work traditionally. So I had to break a lot of glass ceilings to get to where I was. And that breaking of that glass ceiling, that rebellion that I'm going to do this corporate job where traditionally women didn't do, was deepening my identity with the corporate world. Also, there was a lot of positive strokes, because once I did that, there were a lot of, say, cousins or other women and my school children who would look up to me, come ask me, how did you do it? So it was a bit of an inspirational story there. So that deepened and deepened the identity. So I had strongly identified who I am as this rebel person who now broken the glass ceiling from my family perspective and now doing this corporate job and decently being successful at it. Now from there, to give it up, to kind of start figuring out what next, yeah, seemed like a huge step back. So it seemed like going back to where I had fled from in that sense, or fought from. And that was humongously jarring for me.
So what happened? Like, what was that moment of truth where you kind of said that no more, I will make the change even though the future looks uncertain?
I think for me, a big part of that was realizing that my identity was outward looking. My identity was dependent on what other people thought of me or how other people viewed me. And when I looked deep inside, that identity was no longer giving me happiness. But the question was coming in my mind that will this give me happiness for the next 10 years of my life? And the answer was maybe not. So it was definitely time to relook at that identity. And what was happening, as I said, I was dabbling in this stuff over the weekend, right? Those weekends were pure joy for me. Those weekends where I would look forward to it. I would kind of go in excited about what I was doing over the weekends. And at some point I had to kind of acknowledge that my happiness was coming from what I was doing in the weekends. And going towards there, even though I'll have to do a bit of an identity crisis management in that sense, but would also give me a huge sense of happiness, huge sense of joy. So I think it was a realization. Actually, I did a couple of therapy sessions as well around that. But it was a realization of more inward looking than outward looking, and kind of breaking that barrier to be defined by what other people thought of me, I guess.
So you listen to your inner voice, from what I hear.
Yeah.
Okay, lovely. So today, Pooja, you are a therapist, you are a healer, you are a Reiki master, and you have several feathers in your cap, when it comes to modalities of helping other people sort of in their journeys. Could you share some insights on, this whole search for self and what are the pain points and how does one come out of it? I know it's a very big topic, but whatever we can, bring out now.
So I think as I help other people and as I kind of share my journey with them, the first thing I ask them is to look inside, as I was saying just before this, to look inside to see what is it that gives them that moment of joy or that moment of happiness. And for a lot of people, it doesn't have to be quit your corporate work and do something else. For some, that might be the case, and that was the case for me. But for a lot of people, this moment of joy can come alongside the work they're doing. And that's my recommendation for a lot of people, is to start identifying what are these moments of joys and start dabbling into them along with the work that they're doing already, whether it's they're at home or whether they're at corporate, doesn't matter. But start dabbling in where the moment of joy is. And do it for some time, because you might be extremely excited about painting for 2 days, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. But if you do it for like 4 months, you really realize whether that's something that gives you moment of joy continuously, day after day, month after month, week after week. Or it was just something fun to do, try first time, you got good at it, and then after a month it became tedious. So I would say identify what gives you happiness for over a little bit longer period of time. That's kind of number one. Number two, I would also say look into finances, because another thing that worked when I was looking to quit is I was fiercely independent. And to quit and start something completely new, I would have to become dependent on my husband. And that's another identity shift that you have to kind of take and be okay in accepting that. And very similarly, if you look to start something new or you look to change your life, we have to realize that it does take an impact on the financial. So either if you're working today, what's the impact on loss of that income? And when you start something new, few people get lucky and it's very immediate for few people. But for majority of people, it takes time. It's a curve that starts building up. And it might never reach where you were with the corporate salaries. It may not. So are you clear on what's the financial toll this will take? Or even investment, if you're building something where you have to rent space, etc. Not only you're stopping work, but you're actually investing in your business. And that investment breaks even after some time. So I asked them to look into what is the financial impact of that change, and are they comfortable with the financial impact of the change? The third thing is skilling. So assuming you're changing your career completely, like in my case I did, you might have some basic skills, which was the first point we were talking about, as you start dabbling into it and it gives you moments of joy, or you've been dabbling in it for a while and you understand, yes, this is what I like to do. But the skill you need for a personal passion is very different from the skills you need to run it as a business. True. So there is an element of time and, again, finances that will go in upskilling you to get to a point where you're able to run it as a business. So again, are you willing to put in that time, effort, resources to upskill you and get to a point where that becomes a professional offering, where you're ready to give it to other people? And again, that goes into that time curve. And when you're again changing your career completely 100 degrees to something else, there is a build-up. So the graph is not 0 to 100 immediately. There's a slow build-up of the graph. So are you going to be patient enough? Are you going to hang in there while that graph is building up without saying, oh, I wish I didn't have done that. I could have done something else. So I think these are some of the practical aspects of change that you're looking into. At a more deeper level, as I said, it was going into independence versus dependence. It was going into identity. It was going into sense of self and happiness and joy. So we need to explore where are some of these coming from. Much deeper healing, I guess, sometimes is required, because some of the blocks are in our mind. So some of the blocks to say, oh, I can't do this, or there might just be an element of confidence. Oh, I know this is comfortable. This is in my comfort level. If I completely change, will I be able to do it or not do it? Those are some of the challenges which lie deep with it. And then in my case, I work with people with Reiki, I work with inner child therapy, sometimes even past life therapy, to help them identify where are the blocks that is kind of keeping them constrained, allowing them not to move forward.
Pooja, do you find, amongst the people that you help, do you find that sometimes they get blocked because they feel that they need permission from somebody or even themselves, and maybe they're not able to articulate that moment, but that becomes like a block in moving ahead?
Absolutely, you're right. I think many times there are constraints, the family constraints, as I was talking about. So there's an external permission required, which I don't know, sometimes when we peel down, it's not really required. More often than not, the permission requirement is internal. And once the internal permission happens, the external word works out. Because many times we are kind of projecting our internal resistance. I am not sure if I can do this to, hey, my husband's not comfortable if I do this, because it's easier to kind of put it on somebody else versus really look deep inside and say, hey, maybe the resistance is within me.
That's actually a huge moment of truth, which I would say even I have experienced in my journey. What tips would you give women who basically are perhaps stuck over there, or how do they even know that they are not giving themselves the permission?
I think the first question to ask yourself is what's stopping you, right? And I tell people to journal. I journal a lot. So if you actually start writing down what's stopping you and you make a list, and if that list is all externally focused, so this will happen with my family, this is happening with my children, this is happening with my finances, etc., etc. It's very interesting to take a step back and say, okay, so this is all externally focused. What's happening to me internally? What would happen if I don't do this versus I do this? So I'll give you a personal example where I was looking to become an instructor for a modality. And the course was in US, and my child was about a year old at that point in time. And I had to go for 15 days. So in the traditional sense of the word, my husband's working full-time traveling job. Seemed like an impossibility to leave a 1-year-old, go away for 15 days all the way to the US to just become an instructor of a course. And that was my first reaction. And then when I looked deeper inside and said, what's really blocking me? And I said, it's probably a little bit of that fear of that next step. Not really the external circumstances. External circumstances play a role, but the fear was inside me. And when I looked at that fear and dealt with that fear, the logistics got managed. I was able to call my parents and blah, blah, blah. Like the logistics of that trip got managed. I was able to go. I was able to get my instructorship, etc. But for me, that defined that many times when we externalize the problem, it's usually an internal point of reference. So making a list, and then with each list, with each point, to say, okay, what's happening inside me which is not allowing me to solve for this logistics, if that makes sense. And then that going deeper and deeper inside yourself helps. Sometimes it helps to work with a coach or a therapist who can even ask you these questions, start breaking some of these barriers in your head. And once the barriers get broken internally, the external word lines up. It's quite interesting how energetically that happens.
True. And we've experienced that for sure. Okay. So one last question for you is, you spoke about once we give ourselves internal permission, energetically things change for us. And in your example, you talked about how you were able to line up help, you got your parents over, etc. Of course, this is one situation, but I think in every situation, one can support oneself in the decision that they are taking. So would you like to talk a little bit about accessing support? Because again, in our Story of Me workshops, for example, a lot of our participants do not like to reach out to anybody for support.
And I think it goes back a little bit to the identity I was talking about. It goes back a little bit to the sense of dependence and independence I was talking about. So I'll share a bit of my journey in that sense. So going back, coming from a traditional background, I was fiercely independent. I started becoming financially independent at the age of 18, which in India is a bit unheard of for a girl, especially when I was growing up. Now I'm dating myself here. So I became financially independent at 18, and I've lived my life extremely in an independent fashion. And that was one of the big blocks for my change, to go from independence to dependence. The biggest was the financial dependence. But more than that, it was the dependence on support. Because if I now have to do things, I have to ask people to help. I have to ask my husband, I have to ask my parents, I have to ask my parents-in-law, a number of other people. And there was a significant resistance and the identity that goes with that. I'm an independent person.
How can I ask
And
for
sorry?
How
Who
can I
doesn't?
ask for support?
Exactly. I'm the one who supports people.
Yes.
I don't ask for support. Yeah. And in my work, as I do now, I tell people that whenever you don't have a choice, it's an issue. It's a block that needs to be worked for. If you identify yourself so strongly as an independent person who can't ask for support, and even when you would crave support, like in my scenario, and you're still blocked to ask for support, is no longer a choice, and the identity is no longer serving you. You are working with an identity that was a past identity, but is no longer serving you. And that realization needs to happen. And once that realization happened for me, I was able to work, and in this scenario, I did do some therapeutic work on myself with the help of a therapist, where I was able to identify why that independence was so strong in me, and then move and able to release that, heal that part of me, and move to a point where the dependence or independence has become a choice, where I can be independent should that be asked for, and I can be dependent should that be required. And for me, that's very liberating. In fact, I would say it's being more independent than before, because it does not now lock me into place, into a stance which says I have to do this. So whenever I tell my clients, whenever you find yourself locked in, I have to or I can't, it's a place of a block that needs to be worked through. It's a healing that needs to be required. And what we're looking to get to is a moment of choice, where if I need it, if that is in my highest good, if that's where I need to move towards, I can make a choice to be dependent. And that doesn't take away from who I am, because being dependent or independent doesn't define who I am. So I think it's a lot to go with what's the story you're telling yourself of who you are. And the moment you change that story, you are free. You have choices. You can do a lot of things.
Thank you for that. That was wonderful. And what a wonderful way to end. Yes, of course, we are all about the stories we tell ourselves, and especially about how to notice them, how to notice the stories that we tell ourselves, because without noticing, we cannot really change anything. Uh, Thank you, Pooja. Thank you very much for this session. I enjoyed this so much, this chat, and I'm sure everybody who watches this video is going to really get something out of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nani. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to share my stories and share my perspectives. Thank you. And I really appreciate all the work you're doing.
Thank you. Bye.